Hello my friends, HM here. I make videos about topics that are important for whether the future will be better or worse. Elon Musk has said that sooner or later everything that moves, apart from rockets, will be powered by batteries. However, batteries will also play an essential role in keeping the lights on in a power grid that is mostly based on abundant and low-cost solar and wind power. In today's video, I analyze the cost of making batteries with a focus on the raw material cost for the elements needed to make these batteries. I also investigate how hard it is to scale the global battery production to the 16 terawatt hours annually that Tesla has estimated would be needed to make the global economy fully sustainable. Before we begin, you should know that HM Experience aspire to be as true as possible. For that reason, all claims made are documented by clickable links to other internet resources. This documentation can be downloaded by following the link below this video to my vlog at hmexperience.dk. Okay, so let's begin this presentation by jumping over into my PowerPoint here. I have made a table that has the cost breakdown in US dollars for the different battery chemistries that are used, both for grid storage but also for battery electric vehicles. And you can see here on the top, I have the different kinds of battery chemistries listed. There's NMC 811, that's nickel, manganese, cobalt, with these amounts here of material in 80% nickel in the cathode material. Then there's another one that used to be used more, but people are going away from it because it's too expensive in terms of cobalt. That had less nickel in it and 30% cobalt. And then we have this lithium iron phosphate battery, which is very much used, but it doesn't have so much energy density. You can see the watt hours per kilo here is 160, but it has another variant of its kind, and this is a lithium manganese iron phosphate battery that most automakers are actually converting to now because of some advantages that are quite obvious in this table. It has more energy density, it's 210 watt hours per kilo, as we can see here. And then we have this Tesla NCA variant, that's a nickel cobalt aluminum variant. I believe it's the one that Panasonic produced for Tesla, and it's used in the Model Y long range model. And I have used that as the yardstick for this table because I have used a 83 kilowatt hour battery. That is the battery that is in this long range Tesla Model Y, because it's the most sold battery electric vehicle that we know in the world, and so it's a familiar car. It's good to use as a yardstick. And what else can we see? In the final chemistry I have included in this table is the natrium ion or sodium ion battery that is not in mass production yet, but it has been researched for 20 years or so. And now CATL and BYD, that's two of the largest Chinese battery makers and also the largest battery makers in the world. They plan to produce that battery later this year, but we'll see how that will go. But anyway, what you can see in this table is that you have these chemistries on top here. And then I have listed what kind of materials or elements are used to make these batteries at the cell level. So here I have lithium carbonate is listed, sodium carbonate is listed because it's used in this sodium ion battery. It's not used in the other lithium ion batteries. They use lithium carbonate instead. And then I have cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite. Graphite is used for the anode material. And then hard carbon. Hard carbon is also used for anode, but only for this sodium ion battery. The lithium ion batteries, they are using graphite. And then I have listed iron here in the cathode material, and aluminium and copper, and also steel. Steel is not used in the cathode or anode material or electrolyte of the battery, but it's used for making the casings that the final battery is stuffed into. So it's kept together with a steel box or a steel can. So that's why I have steel here. And then there's also plastics and other materials in it. That's binders and separator films and stuff. They can be composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphor and fluor. I don't have any breakdown of raw material for that, but I have it for everything else, which is most of the weight of the cell in the battery. And then I have gone out to the commodity market basically and found the prices of these raw materials. These prices are in all kind of measures and also two currencies. It's either traded in US dollar or Chinese yuan, but I've standardized it so it's all represented here in US dollar per kilo of this material. Then I have a price change from current. I will show that later in my presentation, how I expect some prices to change as we grow production of batteries, because of course that will have some effect on the prices. So I included that in my table in order to be able to quickly calculate what would happen to all these material costs if we change the prices that we currently have. And otherwise, I have found sources on the internet that shows exactly how many kilo of these raw materials that are included in the battery cell, and then I basically multiply the kilos included in these cells for a 83 kilowatt hour battery pack, as would be in the Model Y vehicle, and I multiply that with the current price in the commodity market for that raw material, and then I get these US dollar amounts of raw material that is included. And to my knowledge, there are no publicly available material on the internet. I've searched it using all these search engines and GTP4 and what have you, and there are no publicly available information that have this information about in US dollar amounts for different battery chemistries. I made that so you can see it here. It's publicly available now in my video and also on my website, where you can download the spreadsheet that contain all these numbers and also the sources that are clickable. And it's a dynamic spreadsheet, so you can easily change the size of the battery to say 100 kilowatt hour pack or a 1 kilowatt hour pack, and instantly it will recalculate this table. So I think it's a pretty good job in terms of making some relevant information here about battery cost. So I sum up all these battery costs for each chemistry, and here we have a total cell raw material cost that I get in this row here. And then I calculate cell raw material cost in terms of kilowatt hours in that battery pack, because that's really what we want to know. How much does it cost per kilowatt hour? And of course, this is just this number here that I divide by 83 kilowatt hours. And then I add a cell production cost, because it's not enough just to have the raw materials and buy that for making the cell. You also have to manufacture it and put it into a finished cell. So that will of course cost some money. You need a factory for that and some people who maintain and operate that factory. And here I have simply set it across all the different chemistries. I've set it to $50 per kilowatt hour, that cost of manufacturing the cell. I found some sources that tells how much a battery should cost, and also how much of the cost that is for cells and how much of the cost that is for putting the battery cells into a battery pack, because we can't just use cells. They have to be packed together to form a battery pack with some power electronics and a lot of connections, and also some safety features and some cooling. So we need to make a complete pack here, and I have prices for the complete pack. I found sources for that. But otherwise, the battery packaging cost, how did I estimate that? I have set the number so that it fits pretty well with the sources I got for how it should be overall for the cost of these battery cell. And then I've used Tesla's battery cell here. I've set that to $30 for packaging cost per kilowatt hour. And then I have marked the other chemistries. I've marked them either up or down depending on how energy dense gravimetrically, that is watt hours per kilo, that the battery cells are. So take a look at this Tesla battery pack here. Well, it has 269 watt hours per kilo. And if we take a look at this NMC 811 battery pack, well, it has a little higher energy density. So accordingly, it's marked down here. So it's not $30, but not $29.35. It's only a little bit better than the Tesla pack. That's why it's only marked down a little bit. But there are other battery packs that are marked up quite a lot. For instance, this lithium iron phosphate, it only has 160 watt hours per kilo. So it gets a bigger mark up in battery packaging cost. And of course, you would expect the packaging cost to go up if the cells weigh more and also has bigger volume. And you can also see for this pack here, I also have the volumetric energy density in watt hours per liter. And these cells here also don't have as great volumetric energy density as Tesla's cell here that has 750. Whereas this one here is less than half for this lithium iron phosphate battery. And it's even worse for this sodium ion battery. It's 260 for that. It's a little more than a third. You can see 260 compared to 750 watt hours. Okay, so now that we know what's up and down in this table, let's talk about some of the interesting findings we can infer from this table here. Something that really surprised me is that this sodium ion battery, it's actually the most expensive of all the battery chemistries. It has been hyped on popular media and YouTube videos as a new breakthrough battery that will make it much cheaper to make battery electric vehicles, but that's simply not true, at least not with today's prices for raw materials. No matter how I look at it, it is the most expensive battery. It has $143 per kilowatt hour. That's how expensive it is, and that's higher than any of the other battery chemistries. That's really surprising for me. And you could say the villain in this finding is this cost of hard carbon. This battery specifically uses hard carbon instead of graphite for the anode material. And hard carbon is really expensive. It costs $30,000 per ton or $30 per kilo, whereas graphite only is about $10 per kilo. And that makes this battery more expensive. It also is more expensive because it has really poor volumetric energy density, watt hours per liter. As we just mentioned, it's 260 compared to 750 in the Tesla Panasonic battery. So excuse my French, but it sucks in terms of volumetric energy density, and it also costs more. So I don't think it will be used that much for making vehicles. I simply can't see why someone would use it when it costs more and it has such poor characteristics. But for energy storage, it may be useful. Also because in the future, the price of this hard carbon could go down as mass production begin. And both CATL and BYD are putting a lot of money and effort into making this battery happen. And sure, they will do something about the price of hard carbon. And if they can do that, then of course this cost at least will get better. And also we can see a great thing about this sodium ion battery chemistry is that it doesn't have any lithium, cobalt, nickel or copper in it. All these materials I just mentioned there are pretty expensive, and we can see it doesn't have any of that in it. But it does have this hard carbon in it, and that's of course problematic. Maybe I should say that graphite and also hard carbon, both of these materials can be made synthetically, or rather hard carbon is always made synthetically. That means it's manufactured in a factory. It's not mined. What you do is you take some raw materials, precursors that contain carbon, and then you heat them in a big oven. That is a vacuum oven where you can control also the atmosphere, so you can prevent oxygen from burning the carbon when you heat the materials up. So you bake this in a particular way with a particular temperature with particular precursor materials for X amount of time, and then you turn this material into hard carbon, and then you probably have a purification process afterwards that it has to go through in order to get to the purity that's needed for use in a battery. And graphite is produced pretty much the same way, different kind of precursors and different kinds of temperatures and stuff in that oven that you bake this material in. And it's a batch process, so you can't, because you have to have an oven, it has to be a vacuum chamber. Because it's a batch production process and not a continuous process, it's much more expensive to produce. So it will never be inexpensive to produce these materials. It will always cost quite a lot. Even though the carbon is plentiful on Earth, it's not going to run out of raw materials for making this stuff, but it's a matter of how much it costs to produce. One thing I could say before I leave this sodium battery completely is that both graphite and hard carbon are basically 100% carbon, and coal that we mine also and burn for power is also 100% carbon, but just another kind of carbon. And you can get that coal for 15 cents per kilo on the international commodity market delivered anywhere on the planet. So from 15 cents per kilo to $10 per kilo or to $30 per kilo, that's a big jump. And the only thing that happens here is that these carbon atoms are simply organized in a different way. And that's what makes it expensive. But you know, a diamond is also pure carbon, and it's also just organizing carbon a little bit different, and then it has completely different characteristics. And there's another wonder material. It's graphene, which is also carbon, and you can use graphene to make extremely strong things that are hundreds of times stronger than steel, but it costs $100 per gram, so that's even more expensive than this, but probably still less expensive than diamonds. So that's just a little fun fact about carbon and the various forms it comes in and how much it costs. So what else can we see from this slide here? Well, we can see that this LMFP battery, that's the lowest cost battery that is available on the market for batteries in the world here. We can see that it has only $115 per kilowatt hour at the pack level, cheaper than anything else out there. And it also has a decent energy density at 210 watt hours per kilo. I also read a few days ago, and I have put a link at the end of my presentation to it, that a Chinese battery maker has managed to make a 240 watt hours per kilo cell of this lithium manganese iron phosphate battery. So it's going up, it is improving. I knew that there were some that could go up to 230, but it's the first time I've heard about 240 for this one. I have conservatively said that it's 210 because we know that's in mass production. And it's always better to have something that is in mass production that we know is happening than all these battery breakthroughs that say they have something that's better, but then it turns out that when they want to mass produce it, they just can't do it. So I'm not so impressed by these battery announcements. What I want to see is what can you do in mass production? Elon Musk has also said there's 100 times more engineering hours that goes into scaling a product into mass production rather than making the product itself. Making a prototype of the product, not difficult. Mass producing is super difficult. Anyway, the last thing I want to say on this slide is that the best strategy for automakers is to design a battery electric vehicle that would be great with this LFMP battery and have it have a 270 miles range and also be able to charge at over 150 kilowatt hours. That would be a great battery electric vehicle. And then simply use this LMFP battery for that. It also has another attractive thing. It doesn't use any nickel or cobalt that these higher energy densities nickel batteries use. So it's easier to scale this battery. Not only is it cheaper, it's easier to scale. That's quite important. So my advice would simply be for automakers to make all of their battery electric vehicles with this design for this LMFP battery, and then they can always swap in a higher energy density nickel battery in the same battery compartment that will have, from this table here we can see I've calculated the percentage of watt hours per kilo relative to LMFP battery. So for the same weight of the vehicle, you could get 28% more range simply by swapping out a nickel-rich battery for this battery. And you can also see down here where I calculated the percentage of watt hours per liter relative to this LMFP battery, that volumetrically it can easily fit, and also the same weight, so you don't have to run through another crash testing procedure, which is pretty costly and time consuming for your vehicles. You can just make the same vehicle for different kinds of batteries and price them differently depending on whether it has this more expensive but also more capable high nickel rich battery in it. That's what I would do. Okay, but I think that's enough for this slide here. So this is a slide from Tesla's annual shareholder meeting. It was just a few days ago, and they showed some interesting slides that actually happen to be relevant for this presentation I'm doing here on battery scaling. They have calculated the required production increases of solar, batteries and other stuff and say it's absolutely achievable. So in order for the world to go fully renewable, they've calculated that we need to make 3 times as many solar panels and wind turbines as we do today. Currently, we install 360 gigawatt of that every year, and we need to go to 1000 gigawatt of solar and wind every year in order to base the power production of the planet on solar and wind. That's not a lot. In fact, solar is growing at 25% per year, so this can be achieved in 5 to 6 years. We could already be at the level where we need to be in order to go fully renewable in the power sector. What's harder is to scale all the battery production that we need. We only produce about 540 gigawatt hours of batteries. That's what we produced in 2022. But that's up 5x from just 4 years ago. Was only 100 gigawatt hours. But where we need to go to make world economy fully sustainable is to 16 terawatt hours. That's the same as 16,000 gigawatt hours. So that's 29 times current production. And I'll come back to that in details, how we are going to do that and how much material it will require for each battery chemistry, because I calculated it. And then Tesla has also calculated that we need to increase electric vehicle production 11 times. Last year we made 8 million battery electric vehicles, and we need to make 85 million battery electric vehicles. By the way, I can say that only about half of these 16 terawatt hours will be for batteries for battery electric vehicles. The rest will be for grid storage and other uses, perhaps airplanes and ships. They didn't say specifically that batteries was also for airplanes and ships, but it has to be because they have calculated for how to go fully renewable. And of course, we also need to do it with ships and airplanes and mining equipment, everything that moves. So that was this slide here. And they also calculated how much energy do we need to spend. Actually, if we go fully renewable with our global economy and everything pretty much is powered by wind and solar, we only need to produce 84 petawatt hours per year in order to power everything in our civilization. That's compared to 165 petawatt hours that we currently need to mine in mostly fossil fuels. And the reason is that when all the machines we have invented that use fossil fuels, they are pretty wasteful. Most of the energy is just wasted in heat that is going out, for instance, a combustion engine in a car. A lot of energy is just going out of the tailpipe. Not only pollution come out of that exhaust pipe, it's also heat that is wasted. Whereas electric vehicles, they convert nearly all the electricity or energy in the battery into motion of the car. It's far more efficient. So in fact, we only need half the energy we currently use in a world that's based on renewable energy, where all our machinery is running on electric motors. Apart from rockets that we send to orbit, they have to be powered by biogas or biofuels. They cannot be electric. So that's one little interesting fact they calculated. And also another interesting fact is that the mining will drop. It will not increase when we have to make all these batteries and solar and windmills. It will decrease, and it will mainly decrease because fossil fuels won't be needed anymore. Before Tesla made their presentation at Shareholder Day and gave us all this information, I had actually calculated similar things, and my data corroborate Tesla's findings. I have calculated that the world would not need to mine or extract 16 billion tons of oil, gas, and coal, and Tesla have calculated it here to 18 billion tons. They might have used slightly more updated data than I used, or maybe they made an error in their calculation. I certainly haven't, but it's close enough, I think, to say that it's confirmed. Also, I estimate that we have to spend a few billion more in mining of materials. It's mostly copper ore mining that's needed to make the world go fully renewable. At least I only calculated with regard to batteries. I haven't done it with regard to materials needed for making solar panels and wind turbines, but I think I'll do it, and I'll make that calculation and make another video about that in the future, just to see if Tesla's calculations were right and if they differ in any way. That'll be fun. Anyway, as we can see from this slide here, we will have to mine less stuff, not more. if we go fully renewable. And most of the reason for that is that we don't need those 16 or 18 billion tons of fossil fuels that we can stop mining or extracting. I will say that in terms of making plastics and also for asphalt production for roads and stuff, we'll still have to keep mining some fossil fuels, but it's not a problem because they're not burned and they won't emit pollution that way if they're made into plastics or asphalt. Then they stay, you could say, in the ground. So it's not that the oil industry will completely go away or fossil fuel industry will completely go away, but instead of making fuels, they will just be making materials. I don't know how much we need of that. 1 gigaton would probably be enough. So I think that's enough for that one. And then total need for fully sustainable economy, that was also a slide they had. They said 16 terawatt hours of batteries should be made per year. And then they say the total storage that would be needed would be 240 terawatt hours. That implicitly implies that they expect these battery packs to last for on average 15 years, because if you divide 240 terawatt hours with 16 terawatt hours, so that's 15 years, and then it's recycled. The great thing about batteries is that the materials you mine for the batteries, well, they can be fully 100% recycled into new batteries after 15 years. So all we need to know is that can we mine enough stuff for those 240 terawatt hours. And I've made that calculation, and I'll show you exactly how it is for different kinds of battery chemistries. And what else do they have in this graph that's funny to check out? Well, we need 30 terawatts of renewable power, of solar and wind power. And in the previous slide we saw they said that 1 terawatts per year of new solar installations and wind power installations, that would be enough to go fully renewable. Well, that implies that they expect these installations to last on average 30 years, again, because 30 terawatt divided by 1 terawatt hour, that's 30 years. And then again, we can recycle the materials and make new solar panels and wind turbines from the same material. We don't have to mine anymore once we have made this stock of solar power plants and wind power plants. And then how much land do we have to carpet the entire planet with solar panels and wind turbines? No, we only have to carpet 0.2% of the land mass with solar panels to achieve all this power, to power all of civilizations. There's this narrative promoted by who knows who, that there's not enough land for solar power to power all of civilization, or not enough wind to power all of civilization. Man, if you do the math on it, you can power our civilization hundreds of times over with solar power and wind power. And I have done that myself. I made that calculation. I can only confirm it. So that's true. And yeah, half the energy required, that's just what we saw from previous slide. Tesla has also calculated, I haven't done that calculation myself, that 10 trillion US dollar is needed in manufacturing equipment for making all these batteries and solar and wind power installations. And 10 trillion dollars is nothing. It's only 10% of 1 year of GDP globally. So with the spending from just 10% of what is produced of money each year on the planet, we could go fully renewable, convert our economy from fossil fuel-based economy to renewable-based economy. That's actually a staggering small amount of money. But I will go a little deeper into that. I have calculated how much it would cost with current battery prices to buy those needed 240 terawatt hours. So let's get into that. Okay, so down here I have this calculation where I've calculated what is the battery packs to terawatt hours, and then I've calculated how many billion US dollars does it cost to make these battery packs. So if we want to make 240 terawatt hours of battery packs, and we are going to use this lithium manganese ferrous phosphate battery that's the lowest cost in terms of kilowatt hours, well, that will cost us 27.6 trillion US dollars. So the 10 trillion dollars Tesla has estimated it would cost to convert the entire economy into a renewable based economy. That's the cost of building the factories for all the battery packs and all the metal refineries and stuff, and the extra mining we have to do, and also the factories for the solar panels and wind turbines and stuff. that was $10 trillion. But of course, there will be more costs for actually building the wind turbines, the solar panels, and all these batteries. And with regard to batteries, it's about $28 trillion at current prices. Of course, these prices will drop before we get to 240 terawatt hours of battery packs produced, but I'll come back to that in a few slides. Let's see what else we can see from this slide here. Basically, I have done a scalability analysis of raw material reserves, because I've listed the global reserves here in million tons for the same materials we can see here: lithium carbonate, sodium carbonate, cobalt, nickel, manganese, graphite, hard carbon, iron, aluminium, and copper. All the stuff we need to make batteries. Those reserves here are listed in million tons. Then I have the price in US dollar per kilo for these materials. Then we have a stock, you could say a value of, an estimate of value of these reserves if they were all mined and refined. So all the lithium carbonate would be worth $4 trillion here. And if we mined all 870 million tons of copper, it would be $7 trillion worth at current prices. Okay, but what is interesting for this table is that it has calculated the billions of Model Y battery pack at 83 kilowatt hours that can be made using all the reserves that we have available on the planet. And you can see, if we consider again this lithium manganese ferron phosphate battery, then there's enough lithium carbonate in our reserves to be mined and produced for making almost 4 billion Tesla Model Ys with that long-range battery pack. And that's actually the limiting factor for this battery, because we can see we have plenty of manganese that also goes into this battery. We could make 80 billion Model Ys if we used all the manganese reserves for that. And graphite, we can make 4.7 billion Model Ys if we used all the graphite here. The reason I have marked this in red with regard to graphite is that 2/3 of all graphite in the world is made synthetically, and I actually believe that the graphite we use for battery materials, even more than 2/3, is made synthetically because it has to be of a very high purity. You can also make it from mined graphite, but that mined graphite will be impure, so you need to go through some processes that will purify it. And I believe that's quite wasteful if you need to get to the purity level for graphite that's used for batteries. Then you use 10 times more mined graphite. So you mine 10 tons of graphite in order to produce 1 ton of purified graphite. And that also, another thing I should say is that the price here I have used is this almost $10 per kilo for this graphite. That is for graphite that is pure enough to be used for batteries. There are many qualities of graphite, and the lowest cost qualities of graphite, the least pure of them, they only cost $1 per kilo. But we are talking about, can we scale this stuff, and is there enough of this stuff? And yeah, for graphite, well, it's a carbon-based product, and we have plenty of carbon, and if we can't mine it, then we'll just make it synthetically, and we have endless stocks of carbon materials or precursors that can be used for making synthetic graphite, so it's not really a limitation at all. And then if we look at iron, well, we could make 2,000 billion Model Ys if we used all the iron and we have in reserves, and aluminium, we could make 120 billion cars, so it's not really a limitation at all. Even copper is not a limitation. There are 22 billion Model Ys we could make if we used all the copper reserves just to make Model Y batteries. So the limiting factor is the lithium carbonate, and as I'll soon show, even that is not so much of a limiting factor. I'd say the more interesting thing is that nickel is, if we consider some of the other battery chemistries that has nickel and also cobalt in them, then we can see that there is a restriction here. We can only make, for instance, Tesla's battery here, we can make 1.3 billion Tesla cars before we use up all our cobalt reserves. And the nickel reserves has 1.6 billion Model Ys in it before that reserve is used up. But with nickel, it's actually worse than it looks, because 69% of all nickel that are mined today is used for making stainless steel alloys. Stainless steel has, I think it's 3.8% nickel in it, and stainless steel is in strong demand. We'll probably need to double stainless steel production in the next 10 years, and that means that there's less nickel available for making batteries. So battery and stainless steel will have to compete for what nickel we have. And so I'd say the most scarce resource really is nickel. It's not even cobalt. Also because cobalt can be mined plentifully from deep sea. I've made a video about it. You can go and watch that video. But also I made a video about specifically about nickel if you want to know more about that. And again, go to my channel webpage at YouTube and you can find these videos easily. Then sodium-ion batteries, they have zero supply issues. You can see that over here. There's plenty of sodium carbonate. And again, I'm not even sure that sodium carbonate is what you use to make these sodium-ion batteries. It could be that it's kitchen salt here, because kitchen salt is natrium chloride and there's natrium in it, and it might be kitchen salt that is used to make these sodium-ion batteries. It might not be sodium carbonate. I tried to look it up, but I couldn't find the answer to it, so I'm not sure. But I'd say my best bet is that it's probably sodium carbonate that's used for it. So, but then again, this sodium-ion battery, although it doesn't seem to have any limitation whatsoever on raw materials, it's still more expensive currently because it uses this hard carbon that is so expensive, $30 per kilo, and we actually need quite a lot of it in order to make a battery. So it ends up being the most expensive battery. In order to make this viable, in any use case, we need a supply chain for hard carbon that can make hard carbon at less than $30 per kilo. Otherwise, I don't believe there's a future for sodium-ion batteries. But China and specifically CATL and BYD are trying hard to make that sodium-ion battery happen. They might be in mass production with it later this year, but it won't happen that suddenly they're in mass production. It will take a couple of years to scale up, and maybe that they'll actually drop it because it's simply too expensive. But it's not a done deal at all. What else can we say here? What would it cost to make 16 terawatt hours of these LMFP batteries? That would cost $2 trillion. So that's a $2 trillion business to get enough battery packs made to go fully renewable. $2 trillion is a big industry. You can compare down here with coal, oil and gas. Global sales of oil is 2.2 trillion, and then 1.2 trillion here for coal, and for gas it's 1.3 trillion. Together we are spending $4.7 trillion on fossil fuels. But if we made all these batteries and also the wind power and solar power, then we don't need to spend 4.7 trillion on fossil fuel mining and extraction. That would go away. And also, I can guarantee you that we don't need to spend 2 trillion on making these battery packs because it will get cheaper over time. But let's get to the next slide here. So one of the reasons that I expect the prices for making batteries will drop significantly in the future is that currently the price for lithium carbonate is much higher than it should be. In fact, I found a source from a Chinese website that says that the producers of lithium carbonate, they can make it for $4,260 per ton. But the average trading price last year in 2022, that was $37,000 per ton. Let's go back. We just saw here in this slide here that the price is currently, that's the latest price I have, it's only a week or so old, for lithium carbonate is $32,000 per ton or $32 per kilo. And we can also see long term the lithium price, if we go back, normally it used to be $5,000 per ton, and it's only as of late that these lithium carbonate prices has gone up. The miners are not getting any more. They are mining spodumene, which is a lithium-rich rock, and also lithium-rich brine. They are mining that for very little. All the money from this excess money is made by the refiners. So what the world need to do ASAP is to build a lot of lithium carbonate refineries that can refine raw materials for lithium. We have plenty of lithium to make a whole lot more batteries. So I expect that once we get production going for refinery of lithium raw materials, then the price for lithium carbonate will also drop back dramatically. And why do I think also that we saw in the previous slide that the limiting factor was lithium? We could make about 4 billion Tesla Model Y long range, but that's when we consider the reserves, and here they are distributed on country. We can see the world total is 25 million tons of lithium metal. That's equivalent to 131 million tons of refined lithium carbonate. But actually, we have almost 4 times as much in resources of lithium, so we could mine 4 times more. The problem is just with resources is that either they are not accessible for political reasons, like here in Bolivia. They're definitely economic to mine, but Bolivia has no mining at all of lithium because they have a political regime that demands crazy things for foreign miners to come and mine in Bolivia, and it just doesn't make any sense economically, and that's why nothing is happening in that country. And it's a pity because it's a very poor country, and it would be great if they could start mining that lithium and make some money from it, and also get the standard of living up in that country. But they have a dictatorship that prevents that from happening. Also in the United States, actually almost no production is happening of lithium, but they have an enormous resource. I don't know if that's because it's too difficult to get permits for mining this stuff, or whether it has just been decided politically that that shouldn't be done, or maybe it's the ore qualities is making it uneconomic or something to mine. But I doubt it's uneconomic with these enormous prices we have for lithium carbonate. Then there'd be plenty of money to pay the miners a little more. So I'd say if you consider the resources that are available globally here for lithium, well, then we have enough of 16 billion Tesla Model Y. So plenty of lithium. And that was really the bottleneck. Everything else is easy if we consider this battery chemistry of lithium manganese ferron phosphate. That is the cheapest one, and that everybody should just focus on getting into production with. But then, of course, as I'll show you later in the presentation here, once you start making a lot more batteries, you will also be able to produce these batteries at lower cost. The production cost simply drops the more you make of it. And that will be particularly true for this lithium manganese ferron phosphate battery. If everybody are starting to make more of that battery, well, then it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy that the price will drop on that one, because the whole supply chain will be built much faster and more effectively for that kind of battery. So the next slide here shows a percentage of current global production to make 100 million 83 kilowatt hour batteries, or 8.3 terawatts of battery cells. And I have listed here again, looks like the previous tables we've seen, where I have the battery chemistries over here, and then I have listed the raw materials that are needed for these battery chemistries. But I start here by displaying the annual global production in million tons. Then we have the price of that raw material, and then the billion US dollar value of global production. So we also get an impression of how big is this industry. And the important thing to note here is that the smaller the industry, the easier that industry is to scale. Smaller industries are much easier to double or quadruple in size than much larger industries, because they require less resources, the small industries, when you double them. So here we can see lithium carbonate, even at those very high prices that are definitely going to go down. We are talking about a very small industry, 22 billion US dollar in turnover. And how much would, for instance, for this lithium manganese ferron phosphate batteries, how much would it take to make 100 million of these Model Y battery packs? Well, we only need to produce about 500% of the current production. That's 5x, or about 100 billion US dollar. But if the price is going to drop to 5 or 6 US dollar per kilo, then that industry will basically not grow in terms of volume. So it's a tiny industry, even if it's supposed to produce 8.3 terawatt hours of battery cells. Okay, we need 16 terawatt hours of cells, so we will just double this. That's almost 10x more that we need to produce per year. But still, it won't be a big industry, especially when we consider that the prices are definitely going to go down. And what else can I see with this table? It's only really lithium that needs to grow by several 100%. Everything else is something that will only have to grow a little bit. Well, cobalt will have to grow 300% if we should produce Tesla's cobalt and nickel-rich battery packs. And then nickel will have to grow 200%. Nickel, however, is a pretty large industry. It's an $80 billion industry. So to grow that 200%, that would grow to a 240 billion US dollar industry per year. But it can be done, definitely. And it can also very definitely be done with lithium. And cobalt, yeah, that's a tiny industry, 6.6 billion US dollar. To triple that to $18 billion. Easy peasy. Just buy some more mining equipment, get the mining going. It could be done very fast. It's not at all a problem to scale that. What else? We should, of course, note that those 3.3 terawatt hours that we have here in this table, it's only half of what we need to go 100% fossil free in the economy. So we can double all these numbers, but I just thought it was easier to do the calculation for 100 million vehicles, because that's kind of what's needed to go fully electric, battery electric in the vehicle industry. The rest of this doubling is for everything else, grid storage, batteries for ships and airplanes, stuff like that. So I guess that's enough for this slide here. Now, I said I would do a prognosis of what I expect will happen with the commodity prices in the future when we start to build all these batteries, because of course we should expect it to affect battery prices. So I made a little prognosis. So here we have the table we saw from before about how much it costs to make these different battery chemistries if we make this battery pack for Model Y long range. And the winner is this LMFP battery. That's for prices in 2023. Now let's go to what I expect to happen in the time period of 2027 to 2032. That will be a period where there's an extreme growth in the mining and demand for these battery electric vehicles. Now, I've talked a little bit about how I expect lithium carbonate to drop in price. For that time period, I expect lithium carbonate to drop to 40% of the current prices. That would mean, because it's $32 per kilo currently, and I expect it to drop to about $13 per kilo. That's 40% of what it is currently. And then sodium carbonate, no change there, and it won't matter either because it's so cheap. So it doesn't really matter what happens to that price. Cobalt, I expect that to double in price, simply because it's a great material for making batteries. You can make safe and high energy density batteries with that material. So I do expect there will be a lot of demand for cobalt, and the price will probably double. And also nickel, I expect the demand for that to go quite up and to double in price. And manganese, we have plenty of manganese in the world, and it's also very affordable. I don't think anything will happen to that price. Graphite, it's made mostly synthetically, as I said, and I think there'll be a lot of demand for it, and it'll be hard to keep up with the demand, so it might increase a little bit in price. I've said 20% increase in price for graphite, but it's not because we don't have enough of the raw materials for graphite. It's only because it takes time to build these factories, and they probably need a little extra prices to speed up the tempo in making new factories that can produce graphite for batteries. And also hard carbon, that's a big joker here. I've said it would drop half from $30 per kilo to $15 per kilo as this supply chain is built. It's China who's doing it. They're the only one who's really doing it, but I do expect them to be partially successful in this and get that price of hard carbon down, so they can make this battery more viable. But let's take a look at it, at the final prices, when we take a look at it, at what the effect will be of these changed prices for raw material. Iron, we also have a lot of that. I don't expect any price changes there. Aluminium, no price changes. I expect copper. Well, we need copper for both making the battery packs, but also for electric motors that use copper. And also, if we build more solar power and wind turbines, well, there will also be a demand for copper there. So I expect, worst case, it could be 50% more expensive. And then steel, same as iron, it's the same price because steel is 98% iron, so it's the same. Okay, but all in all, we end up with some new raw material cost here. We still have even after those price changes, we still have that this lithium manganese ferrous phosphate battery is the cheapest battery to produce, and now it's actually quite a lot cheaper in raw materials than this nickel cobalt rich battery. So it'll get even more advantageous to build these LMFP batteries rather than these nickel cobalt batteries, because of course we have assumed here that nickel and cobalt will increase twice. But the reduction I just mentioned here for hard carbon to $15, it's not enough to give this sodium ion battery a cost advantage in terms of raw materials. Still not enough. And then also I expect something else to happen when we get at this period here. We are going to produce a lot more of these battery cells, so we have higher production volume, and that means our production cost per kilowatt hour will drop. I've just said here they drop by 30%. The multiplication factor here is 0.7, and also say that battery packaging cost per kilowatt hour will also drop by that amount. So all in all, we get a kilowatt hour price for this lithium manganese ferrous phosphate battery of $83.6. If we look at the other prices for the other chemistries, it's still the most affordable battery. But okay, this sodium ion battery is getting closer. And also it's getting cheaper here in this period. It's getting cheaper than these nickel cobalt rich batteries for the first time. And that means that perhaps they would be used for battery storage, but not really, because you can make these manganese iron phosphate batteries cheaper, so it's still not competitive. But let's go further into the future, and I do that here. What will be the prices from 2033? At that time, I expect that we have actually reached the production capacity of making 16 terawatt hours of batteries every year. So the demand will drop for a lot of materials. We have already scaled the industries. The industries don't need to grow as fast anymore, and that should put a damper on the demand for a lot of materials. Plus, we are into a new world where everything is now electric and have lower costs. They don't spend fossil fuel when you have to mine stuff, and so it will be cheaper to mine stuff. I think that this lithium carbonate stuff will drop quite a lot and will go back to its old price of about $5 per kilo. And also sodium carbonate is the same. Cobalt and nickel, we don't really have enough of it to mine on the surface. I still believe that will be like twice as expensive as it currently is today. But manganese will drop, and also I expect graphite to drop to 80% of what it currently is, simply because it gets cheaper to mine stuff in the future. In the future, every mining equipment will be electrified. And also there will be more automation where the excavators and the dump trucks, they will be fully automated. There won't be any people in them. Only if something breaks that you'll send some mechanics to fix the machinery, and that will drop the cost of mining stuff. Hard carbon, I've here said that comes down to $10 per kilo. That's what currently graphite costs. Perhaps that's possible. I don't know. It's a big speculation here. Iron, also 80% of what it currently costs, again because mining is cheaper. Same with aluminium, that's what I expect. And copper, we keep mining a lot of copper, and of course the ore quality will drop a little bit, but then again mining stuff will be cheaper, so I think it'll stay pretty much the same, the prices in 2033 and forward, as they are currently. You would say they would have fallen from their previous period where we needed to expand these copper mines. And then steel, same thing as up here, 20% drop. And then we calculate the new total raw material cost. Again, this lithium manganese ferrous phosphate wins at $1,100, and it's still cheaper, actually significantly cheaper than this sodium ion battery. And also I expect further drops in production costs, so a 50% reduction here, both for cell production cost, also for battery packaging cost. So that will end up with a total cost for this lithium manganese iron phosphate battery of $58 per kilowatt hour. And it's still the cheapest battery to produce. So if I should bet my money, I wouldn't bet it on sodium ion batteries. I don't think it will play a big role either for cars or battery storage. The main battery, that will be this lithium manganese iron phosphate, because it's cheaper. And then we will use nickel cobalt rich batteries that have higher energy density. We'll use that for airplanes. But the big business in battery making will be this lithium manganese iron phosphate batteries. So that was my prognosis for how I think it would go. Okay, I made one more table here that shows how this prognosis for battery prices and battery production will progress year after year. So we start with 2022, where we know we produced 540 gigawatt hours of batteries, and then we go up. I expect in 2032 we will reach those 16 terawatt hours that Tesla estimated is what we need to go fully battery electric with everything. But that's only for new cars. Of course, there'll still be a pool of cars that use fossil fuels, but I say in 2032 I expect every new vehicles produced to be battery electric. Production of fossil fuel engines will stop at that time, but not for airplanes and ships. It'll take a little longer to get that done. But we'll keep rising production, but not as fast. It will grow more or less with the growth rate in the economy. That's why the growth rate here is dropping to 3% per year for batteries. And we can see in order to get to 16 terawatt hours before 2032, we need to grow quite fast, 50% every year in a couple of years, and then it fades off. In order to guide my own expectations for this, when I reach those 2 terawatt hours extra of capacity every year that's put into this industry, that's the additions here, change in terawatt hours, I have that in this column, then I start to slow down the percentage growth, because of course you can't keep growing at 50% every year. Then the whole universe will end up being just batteries. It will drop eventually to a slow growth rate, and I think that will happen about in 2032. After that, it will be only a 3% or something. And we can also see here what happened to the prices per kilowatt hours of these battery packs that I showed in the previous slides, how that should fall. Oh, here I have the prices shown year after year. And then we have battery sales in billions, where I multiply the battery price here with the battery production per year. If you can remember from the previous slides, we multiplied the $115 per kilowatt hour with 16 terawatt hours. That gave us a $2 trillion annual industry for making batteries. But of course, it will never reach that level because the prices are dropping before it reaches that level. The highest it will ever go is this $1.35 trillion. And then the prices will simply drop on the cost here. It will still be a big industry. And also here I've calculated the needed lithium carbonate that we need to make in tons, because that's the most critical of all the raw materials. So it would be nice to see how much that is. And here we have lithium carbonate accumulated in tons. And how is lithium carbonate in percentage of 2022 production? Well, it's actually only 31.6% of total 2022 production if we use this LMFP battery chemistry, and then it just grows. And it's almost 10x of that production when it reaches the sustainable level, you could say, of 16 terawatt hours produced of batteries per year. And what do we have here? That's accumulated lithium carbonate in percentage of the reserves we had for lithium. And you can see they never get over 100%. And that's only with the reserves. We saw in another slide that we probably have resources that are 4 times as large as our reserves. So we really have plenty of lithium. What we do not have currently is plenty of refineries that can take lithium raw materials and convert it into lithium carbonate for making batteries. That we need a lot more of. And Elon Musk has said that that's really the limiting factor. It's refining capacity. It's not mining of lithium. That's just a false narrative that has been put out there by who knows who. We can always mine more lithium. Just put some more excavators and dump trucks into these lithium mines and we'll have a lot more. We can easily 10x production. What is not easy is to 10x production of lithium carbonate in refineries. That's what we need to put more effort into doing. And also I have continued, even after we reach 16 terawatt hours, I expect growth to happen. And also I wanted to do this cumulated terawatt hour growth to see when do we reach this level of 240 terawatt hours that Tesla expected that a fully fossil-free economy would need 240 terawatt hours to be made in order to get rid of all engines that uses fossil fuels. Well, that could happen here in 2042. And maybe I should say a little bit about, of course, it's very difficult to predict the future, super difficult, but we are going into a world that is changing more and more fast. The wheel turns faster and faster in terms of economic growth and technological change, and that's just going to go even faster, especially because of two things that are happening. Number one, by far, is the invention of artificial intelligence, and especially artificial general intelligence that will come, and that machines will be more intelligent than humans, and they can control other machines. When machines that are more intelligent than us and can think like a million times faster, and then they can control billions of humanoid robots that can then produce stuff. And humanoid robots, unlike humans, they can actually work 24/7. Humans can only work like 8 hours or something per day, and we usually only work 5 days a week. Now, the world will be a completely changed place, and of course, to try to predict what will happen to 2042, that's very long in the future. I just heard an interview with Elon Musk just a few days ago where he said he expected artificial general intelligence to happen in a data center somewhere, probably OpenAI that will develop it first, and it will happen definitely within this decade. And he expected it could happen in five years or something from now. Ray Kurzweil, who has been saying when this would happen, has said it would happen in 2029, and he has been right about his predictions, almost spot on every time, and he have done it for like 30 or 40 years now, predicted the future with a high degree of accuracy. I believe him because he's the best at it of all the futurists. I don't worry at all. We will solve global warming and all that stuff. That will be solved. And yeah, you may call my predictions here for the future too optimistic, but no, they're not. We will have general artificial intelligence. We'll have humanoid robots. Everything, it'll probably take less time than this. I'd say this is a very pessimistic estimate. It'll probably go faster because of this intelligence explosion we will have. But okay, that was a little sidestep here, but I think that's relevant to talk about when we look at predictions so long into the future. Then there's something that's just more important than everything else, and that is the invention of general artificial intelligence. And what else do I have in this table here? I also have the cost in $1 billion of lithium carbonate. It's calculated out here. I think it will reach $84 billion US. That's not a big industry. It's a small industry. It just shows it's easy to scale. It won't really require that many resources. And it will even drop to $40 billion when we go forward here because the price is dropping. And then I have some references. Everything I've said, I have clickable references to it in this presentation that can be downloaded if you follow the link below the video. If you found this video interesting and helpful, consider giving it a thumbs up and also subscribe to my channel, as that would help me to make even better content for the future. I thank you for watching my video, and I wish you a healthy and fulfilling life in freedom and democracy. Goodbye.